Welcome back, everybody. What a sight this is. There's a beautiful big termite mound in the middle of this big open area in Zimbabwe. We're just east of a road called Shinzele, which means honey badger, if I remember correctly. And we've got what we believe to be some members of the Nkuhuma pride thoroughly enjoying this open area, and they found a termite mound to get perfect views, which I have to say is making, from a visual perspective and from an aesthetic perspective, is just spectacular. Look at that. Spectacular images. These termite mounds make perfect vantage points for predators, certainly. It seems as if they've lost interest in whatever it was they were eyeing up. We couldn't really see, but it's very, very open in this area, so they were impaled away in the distance, and their eyesight is so good that perhaps something attracted their attention there. Like a youngish male on the top with a big nick out of his left ear, by the look of it. Sally, you're right. I mean, there's not much. That's why I've gone quiet, to be honest. I don't feel there's anything I can add to make this any better. It's sort of they've picked the most perfect spot that they could possibly choose to light up in from our perspective, and especially with the clouds behind them looking so dramatic. It's a spectacular view. This is probably my favourite visual snapshot that I will remember of the last couple of weeks, as I'm coming to the end of my stint here at Wild Earth this time round, and I think I'm going to remember this as much as anything else. It's just so classic Africa. It reminds me why I do this job. Very special. And the fact that we can bring it to you watching from all over the world makes it even more special. Afternoon, Peter. Thanks for the question. Well, female lions will always hunt for their cubs if they can, but you know, an lion mentality is to try and sort of keep that pride structure together. Occasionally, you will find that a lioness will go off on her own and maybe not hang around with the rest of the pride with her little ones, and that is one way of doing it. But it is a lot more difficult to hunt on your own. They're not blessed with necessarily the guile and the stealth of a leopard, which of course is very much used to hunting on its own. The lion's a little bit bigger, it's a bit harder to conceal themselves, and it's a bit of a gamble. If you don't stay with the rest of the pride and you try and go it alone, if you don't find food, then you are going to really start to struggle, especially if you've got cubs that are still suckling, because producing milk costs energy, And because their milk is nowhere near as nutritious as something like a hyena's milk, for example, a lioness can't travel far because she has to go back and suckle those cubs very regularly throughout the day, especially when they're very, very young. So she can't afford to go and spend a long time away from the cubs in order to hunt for them. I mean, normally speaking, the cubs, when they're a little bit older, then the cubs will be walking with the adults, but they won't really join in with the hunts until they're at least a year old. And until that point, they will be left somewhere close by. It's sort of an unspoken message that is sent to them, and they'll go and sit under a tree while the adults hunt. And then they will, as soon as it is done, someone will lead them to the kill. The problem comes if the cubs are very, very young, and the mother has to go back a long way to go and pick up the cubs and then bring them back to the kill, and then sometimes there isn't as much left. So I've seen it happen once before. It was actually a very unpleasant thing to watch, but I'll tell you the story because it is, it's real nature. We had one lioness, her name was Mandlev, which means ear, because she had a floppy ear. The cartilage was broken in her ear, and she had 2 cubs, and she chose to go it alone. She left the pride and she tried to raise these 2 cubs, and I think they were probably about 3 months old, there or thereabouts, and she was really struggling to find them enough food. She was getting very thin, and we were obviously seeing the cubs quite regularly, and they were becoming very, very thin. You could see the ribs. It was actually becoming unpleasant to watch. And one day we found her, and one of the cubs had died, and the other cub was eating the other cub because it was so hungry, which is something I've never seen before, which was really rather uncomfortable to watch. And then a few days later, the other cub also died, and we actually found the mother eating that cub as well, because she was so hungry. And then once that was done, she went back to the pride, and she rejoined the pride and was able to be a part of that hunting again. So I'm sorry to give you that visual, but it is the raw truth of nature. And if lionesses do decide to go it alone, it is not an easy option, and it doesn't always work out. But I would like to add, she did successfully raise multiple litters of cubs whilst I was watching her. So I think maybe she learnt from her mistake that time. But on a more cheery note, how spectacular are these views? Viewers, you're right, it is survival of the fittest. It's harsh, and it's raw, and it's real. But what has to be done sometimes. And yeah, it's actually one of the hardest parts of this job, I think, is watching those sorts of things happen. You want to help. Your instinct is to help, and to try and make life easier, but we are not here to help. And it's about the individual species and their survival, and individuals and their survival, and we affect the lives of these animals so much just by being around them and by removing their habitat and interfering with their behavioral patterns, their migratory patterns. I think we owe it to them to leave them to do their own thing at times, as harsh as it is and as difficult as it is. And I'm sure I speak for many guides out there that I've been involved in various sightings where I have been moved to tears. You get very attached to these animals, and then when you see the hardships they go through, it's difficult not to feel those emotions. But in the meantime, we are going to sit and enjoy this spectacular view, and I'm sure you'll be back with us soon. Looks like one of the sub-adult males has joined the rest of the family up on the termite mound. I think as the sun starts to get lower in the sky, you can really see the light glinting off their eyes. I keep saying it, but it really is a spectacular sighting. I can't get over it, to be honest. It's calendar stuff, and especially with the clouds behind. Thankfully, where the sun is to my right, as they're looking east towards the sun, there's clear blue skies, and we've got these rather dramatic cumulus clouds forming behind them. I think it's giving so much depth and dimension to this shot. It is absolutely outrageously beautiful. Thank you, Alison. It's a difficult one to explain, and I think unless you spend a lot of time out here with a particular animal or a particular group of animals, it's very difficult to sort of translate. So I'm glad you understand what I'm saying there. It is moving, and it can move you to tears. Sometimes in happiness, and sometimes in sadness. There's a lot of emotions and a lot of a sort of a cathartic experience being out here for long periods of time. It is a bit of a soap opera. We don't want to anthropomorphisize it, but you do get strangely attached to these animals. I remember when I was working in the southern sands, and then I left, and I spent about 4 or 5 years working with the Southern Pride. And then I went to go and do some freelance work in another area of the sands, and that pride happened to turn up there. It was actually a young hippo that had been killed by an adult hippo, and the same pride were there, and they were feeding on the hippo, and it was the first time I'd seen them in probably a year or 18 months. And I was so looking forward to seeing them, and I have to say, as silly as it sounds, whilst I was there sort of, talking to my guests about what was happening and sharing stories, there's a part of me that was kind of hoping that one of those lions' ears would prick up and they would sort of look round inquisitively at the car, because they must have heard my voice for so many years droning on about them to guests whilst I was working with them. And I was genuinely a little bit disappointed and slightly hurt that there seemed to be no recognition. But it just shows we get very attached to these animals, as silly as it may sound. Thanks, Real Giraffe Girl. Yeah, it does look a bit like Pride Rock. It's the Simbambili equivalent of Pride Rock, but there's lots of these massive termite mounds in this open area that I can see from here. But I swear they have picked the most perfect possible one to choose from. Just the perfect little crevices that they can all fit in, and the fact that we've got that clear sky behind them is just perfect. Excuse me, viewers. Joy, no, these sub-adults would not be able to fight off a dominant male, and they wouldn't try. The only hope that they would have is if a new male came into the area, is perhaps the rest of the females in the pride would band together. If it was just a single male, they might be able to sort of dissuade him from it. But at the age, looking at these sub-adults, they look as if they're sort of somewhere between 2 and 3. Around about 2-ish, I would think. The one on the top, perhaps the one that's not up on the termite mound, looks slightly older. They, unlike to get killed, they would run away, and then they would have to fend for themselves, which would be quite tricky for them because they won't have sort of honed their hunting skills. And again, unfortunately, I've seen a couple of young males get booted out early. I'm not honestly sure what happened to these ones. Don't worry, it's not another depressing story. But we saw them have many failed hunts. They ended up sort of eking out a living, stealing food off hyenas and leopards and things until they were big enough to actually hunt for themselves. But yeah, females can band together and chase away males, but these guys, they respect a big male too much. They wouldn't put up a fight, they would run. I feel, excuse me, Viz, I just need to give a quick update on the radio. Afternoon stations to the east, I've got Flamingala static on the termite mound in the middle of the open area just to the north of Shinzele Road. There's one on lock.
Copy, which station is it?
It's Ben, Wild Earth.
Right, yeah, we will come there in a later, but thanks for that. What number that's over here? Sorry, go again?
Yeah, I'm sure this will generate a little bit of interest. It's I don't actually want to tell them how stunning the visuals are, but I think a lot of lodges just coming out for their afternoon drives now, so there might be a little bit of traffic later on this afternoon, but in the meantime we're going to enjoy this. Benedict, in terms of identifying lines, well, it's not quite as reliable to use the spot patterns on the whisker line like we do for leopards. So we're looking more for any specific maybe scars or little nicks. I mean, for example, that the young male lion right on the top right of the termite mound there, if Gert can zoom in on his left ear, you can see he's got a piece missing out of that left ear, so he would be very easy to identify. Otherwise, scarring, perhaps a broken tooth. Otherwise, again, it's easy for me to say, but when you spend time with these cats, you start recognizing individuals. Just like we have different faces, they also have different faces and different body types. And some of them even walk differently. Their silhouette, if you like, is different. Otherwise, a little bit of a change in pigmentation. Oh, look at that one's eyes on the left in the sunlight. Wow. For example, we saw Swazi, one of our male hyenas, the other morning, and Fred pointed out to me that he's got a little pigmentation problem in his nose. He's got a little pink spot on his nose. That would be a nice, easy way to recognize him. But you can see that nick clearly out of this little one's left ear now. See one of the other young male coming into shot now. Okay, let's send you over to JP, as I think he's at one of the dams, and see what animals he has there.